All right, well, it looks like we're on. So I just for everybody tuning in or watching afterward, I'm Mayor Khalil Sarin. We are here at City Hall in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I am joined right now with Marty Gelfand, a candidate for mayor here in the city of Cleveland Heights. And I just wanted to give a brief introduction to what we're doing today and how this came to be before we get started. So we've got a mayoral election coming up pretty soon. The primary is next week. And one of the things that I thought would be a useful exercise is to provide a little bit of on-the-ground information, respond to any practical or other questions that the mayoral candidates might have, and sort of inform this race so that mayoral candidates have sort of a little bit more inside information, a little bit more concrete information that they can rely on as they're talking to people in the city, and just to be prepared for all of the things that come next. And so my administration reached out to all of the candidates and requested availability and interest in sitting down and having a conversation with me about my experience as mayor, and any questions that I can answer, I'm happy to. And we got some responses, I believe. Councilman Petrus, Laura Hong, and Mr. Gelfand here all responded with interest. I believe Deanna Bremer-Fisher also responded. We haven't gotten a response yet from Councilwoman Russell, Vice President Russell, but thus far, I think the responses that we've gotten, Ms. Hong and Mr. Gelfand expressed interest and availability today. Ms. Bremer-Fisher indicated that she would only be available after September 9th. We did not get a response from Vice President Russell, and Councilman Petrus indicated that at first he indicated interest and then indicated that he would just watch the recording afterward. So we are here today on the scheduled date, and thus far we're not sure if Ms. Hong will be joining us at some point soon, but we are a little bit behind, so we're going to get started. And so again, with me is Marty Gelfand, who is running for this position. And we're just going to have a quick conversation about what's going on in Cleveland Heights government, what's going on in the administration. I can provide some insight into what we've done thus far, challenges we've faced, successes we've been able to achieve, and sort of what plans we have that are sort of ongoing plans that you, as mayor, if you are successful in this bid, may have to modify, continue, and that kind of thing in order to make sure that you can hit the ground running, again, if you are successful in this.
And thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And, I don't come here with any agenda at all. I thank you for the invitation. I responded to an invitation. I always like to think the more I know, the better off I am. And, I try to know what I know and try to know what I don't know. And there's certainly a lot to learn. And especially if I, make it through the September 9th primary, there'll be a lot more to do, a lot more to learn. And I welcome any insights that you may have. And thank you for inviting me and the others. It's your, you called it, and I'm here to, see what you have to say.
All right. So first, I did want to make sure. I know we went through sort of the whole invitation process, but I did want to make sure that this is not, and it is not intended to be sort of a candidate forum or, seeing that as just the two of us in the room right now. It's also, I want to make it clear that the government is not endorsing, the government is not pushing any particular candidate. This was an open invitation to all candidates, and I hoped that the six of us could get together and have a robust conversation about what's going on in the city and in the administration. I just wanted to preface everything with that. Because I know that optics can be confusing sometimes if it's just the two of us in the room. And then I guess as a brief introduction, I know that there are people out there who might want to watch this who aren't familiar with either of us, and so I'm just going to provide. And you're a little familiar with me. We've known each other for a little while,
Yeah.
But I'm going to provide a little bit of background so that people have a bit of context into why it even matters that I can provide a little bit of insight on the work that's going to be done here in the city. So I'll do it as briefly as I can. I educationally, I went to Cleveland State University and earned a Master's of Science in Urban Studies with a concentration in law and public policy. That was coupled with sort of a graduate certificate in urban economic development. That was a big focus for me, the redevelopment of our community. I worked for a while at Policy Matters Ohio, which is a state policy think tank focusing on creating an economy in the state that works for everyone. Really fantastic organization. I urge everybody to check them out. After that, I served as a policy advisor for, at that time, the new Cuyahoga County government, transitioning from the 3 county commissioners form of government into a more municipal model, a federal model, with a legislative body, the council, county council, and the county executive in the executive branch. And I was a policy advisor for Cuyahoga County Council for a decade, working primarily on development work, economic development deals and policy, community development work, residential development. But we were a small staff, small but mighty. Shout out to all of the county council staff, current and alumni. And so we were a small staff, so we worked on everything.
That's where I met you, because I was on South Euclid City Council, and I would periodically call my county councilwoman, Sunny Simon, and I'd have questions for her, whether it was on policy or constituent service. And oftentimes she'd send me over to you, and we'd have a conversation, and we, usually I, get answers, sometimes some good answers, sometimes.
And this is the thing. This is exactly the kind of
mostly a good answer.
The thanks. But that was the kind of experience too. Sort of working at the county level, you interact with jurisdictions throughout the county, all of the municipalities in the county. So I was getting all of those calls from 59 municipalities, but really the goal was to assist in the electives in making high quality informed decisions, and so that was about 10 years professionally. And during that time, additionally, I served as a member of the county's Community Improvement Corporation, which, as the county used it, it was a double check on economic development deals, double check, a second set of eyes on underwriting, on deal structures, and before recommending them to county council for their approval or rejection. And so also, while I was working professionally as a policy advisor, that's when I began my service here in the city of Cleveland Heights. I began as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, which makes recommendations about the community development block grant dollars and how those dollars should be spent in the city of Cleveland Heights. I started that in 2013. And then began service as an elected, first appointed, then elected to city council in 2015, won re-election in 2019, and at the same time as we were changing our form of government here in Cleveland Heights, and then in 2021 ran for mayor and became the first elected strong mayor in the city of Cleveland Heights in our history. And I've been serving in that capacity since then. Dealing with quite a lot, over the course of the last almost 4 years now. And it is not just that experience as mayor, but I think the experience as a council member and the experience as a CAC member, and then the experience working at the county level that I think can provide a lot of insight into, I'm imagining, what you would like to accomplish as mayor, and what anybody who may be watching this later, any of the other candidates may be watching this later, I hope that this insight can be helpful to them as well. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. No campaign speeches, but just a background.
The background is I grew up here in Cleveland Heights. Went to Boulevard, Roosevelt, and Heights. Class of '78. Joined the Navy after high school. Was in the submarine force for 6 years. And we were just talking beforehand. That's where I quit smoking, and when I was in the Navy. And I stayed on the East Coast, went to college at St. John's College, Annapolis, Maryland. I stayed after college. I worked in Washington for 5 years, mostly doing environmental policy. Worked for 2 different nonprofits, Clean Water Action and Safe Energy Communication Council. I decided to go to law school, and I came back to Cleveland to go to Case Western Reserve, earned my law degree there, and I was recruited by then freshman Congressman Dennis Kucinich to join his staff. He was having a railroad merger that he was dealing with, and he needed a lawyer on staff, someone who had my background in environmental law and policy. So I joined his staff. We got a really good deal out of the merger, with roads and bridges, tunnel underpasses, overpasses for the trains. For a lot of the communities that were most affected by the increasing number of trains, and also rerouting from some of the most densely populated areas in the district. So, and I helped them with a lot of other things. We stopped the closure of the LTV steel mill. Now it's operating as one of the largest steel mills in the country under the Cleveland Cliffs leadership. But that would have been shut down had we not gone to court and fought them. But I work with mayors, just like you were working with all the different elected officials from the 29 communities of 59, whatever the number was, communities in Cuyahoga County. I was working with some probably about 28, 29 mayors, mostly from the western and southern suburbs. And we were just helping them get, help with roads and infrastructure and advice on, federal requirements for different things. Mm-hmm. And so I got a, good aerial view of what municipalities have to deal with. But then I was living in South Euclid at the time, in the Cleveland Heights School District, behind Cedar Center, those side streets there. Eastway was my street. And I went to Boulevard, Roosevelt, and Heights. My daughter went to Garrity, Roxborough, and she's at Heights now. I served on 9 years on South Euclid City Council. I got elected, like you got elected while you were on county, working for the county council. I got elected while I was still working for Congressman Kucinich. And I served for 9 years. And valuable knowledge about how elected mayor forms of government work. And, so I've been... That's one of the reasons I decided to run, was because I think I had to, at least the background, if not the specific information about everything that's going on in Cleveland Heights. But it's my hometown. It's a place I love. It's a wonderful city. And, I thought I could make a contribution.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for being here and joining us. And I just one more brief caveat here. I did want to let everybody know that we did also provide a Zoom link for people who couldn't join us in person, but potentially could join us in Zoom. So when you see me looking over this way, I'm looking to make sure that I'm not missing anybody who's trying to get into the Zoom. So if anybody does try to get into the Zoom, I will try to notice that and let them in so that we can have as many people join the conversation as possible. So there is a lot going on in Cleveland Heights government, and there has been a lot going on in Cleveland Heights government for the last few years. I can give a sort of a very brief introduction to my entry into the administration of Cleveland Heights, I always felt that I was joining something as opposed to beginning something or starting something. There was work that was already being done. There was a current state that I was an addition to. There are people who are in this organization who have worked in this organization for decades. And other people who were joining at the same time I was, or approximately the same time I was. But when I began in this role, I got a crash course in some of the challenges that we'd be facing. And as much as I knew on City Council, as much information as I was privy to on City Council, there was quite a bit that I just could not have possibly known. And the reason for that is it wasn't really my domain as a City Council member to be so involved granularly in some of the details. But additionally, I think just from a time perspective, there isn't enough time for the administration to make a council as familiar with the ongoing detailed efforts of an administration to people who are simply not involved in that day-to-day work. And that's because, the people doing the work can't also spend all of that time explaining exactly step by step what they're doing, what challenges they're facing. And so the council is generally expected to be a higher level focused entity, not quite, 3,000 feet, let's say maybe 30,000 feet. We're looking at some of these issues, providing for the policy and budgetary tools that the administration needs to achieve the goals of the city. So when I walked in and I started touring the facilities, most of the time as a council member, you come in here for committee meetings, you come in here for city council meetings. It's in the evening, generally, not all the time, but generally, especially at that time. And so there's a lot you don't see. I'm starting to take a closer look, recognizing the state of our facilities, recognizing the state of our equipment and vehicles, recognizing the state of our staffing, frankly. Vacant cubicles abound, that sort of thing. People who used to do work no longer here. And that's what I walked into. So there was quite a bit of preparatory work that needed to take place before getting to any of the more flashy, visioning improvements that we would want to see. Because as you know, most of what an organization like this does is done by people. And if you don't have people in place, you don't have people doing the thing. And that's one of the most important things about a government is the people who are doing the work. And so we started on a path of building up capacity, improving our facilities, improving vehicles, and that takes a lot. So that's just sort of a brief introduction. I promise anybody who thinks they know the state of this organization when I walked in, if you could only see what I walked into, you would be astonished.
Mayor, may I?
We do have one person in the room. I did want to keep it sort of more focused, but
I just want to give you a number to bolster what you just said.
Oh, okay, sure.
In 2021, there were 441 employees, and today there are 630. That's it.
And that's the thing, the numbers, and I'll say that's an interesting thing to take a look at. And I do want to take a look at those trends over time. It's a little complicated because through the course of the year, we fluctuate summer versus winter and that kind of thing. So we want to make sure we're apples to applesing. But I can promise you, we have suffered from continuing austerity measures. I think that continued for way too long, starting probably after the 2008 mortgage foreclosure crisis in earnest. The administration and the council at the time dealing with those economic crises rightfully recognized that they needed to be cautious financially, cutting budgets. We had a lot of programs that were cut at that time. I know I directly experienced them as a resident, some of those programs that were cut. Much of the staffing cuts were through attrition. You know, this is something that organizations do. Someone retires, they simply don't replace them. And service quality can suffer as a result. And we've been dealing with that ever since. And so that's just a very brief introduction into sort of walking in. And any mayor who walks in next is going to be walking into a learning opportunity at first. And that's what this conversation is supposed to be for. It's supposed to help a little bit with extending and lengthening that possibility for learning about what it will mean to be the mayor in 2026. Now, I don't want to assume what the most interesting or impactful bits of information will be to provide to the candidates. And so I wanted to at least start with, were there any specific areas of the city government, or city services, or funding, or policies, practices that you think that we should start with? That maybe you could, if there are any questions you have, I'd like to start there.
No, I came to hear what you had to say.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm interested in all of it.
Okay.
So whatever you had prepared and want to share your insight, that's why I'm here. I'm here to learn from you.
Okay.
You've been
Well,
here 4 years as a mayor, and I value your insight.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I guess I'll start with some of the efforts, going back to some of those capacity building efforts. And I'm going to focus maybe department by department a little bit. And some of the changes that we've been seeking to make and preparing for over the course of the last, 3/4 years.
I think department by department would be a good
Yeah.
way to organize it. If you've already organized it that way, that's great.
Works for me. And this is relatively informal. So I don't have a presentation or anything like that. I just wanted to be a conversation. So I'm going to start with Public Works, I think.
Okay.
Public Works is one of the most important functions of a municipal government. They are out there doing things that directly impact the day-to-day experience of our residents all the time. And we've been experiencing some changes in Public Works over the years. One item that has recently, for some reasons that I'm not going to get into, has come up is things like trash collection, refuse and recycling collection. Under the old form of government, there was a proposal that we change, that we shift away from recycling by throwing recycling into a plastic bag and sitting it on our lawn, or throwing our garbage away in a plastic bag and throwing it on the tree lawn, and having garbage, trucks and recycling trucks come by, and people physically, manually grabbing those bags and throwing them into one of those trucks, right? Now, shifting away from that manual collection to an automated collection, the system that we have in place now, takes a lot. And I think the council at the time, I was not so much in favor of creating a task force, because looking at the data, I had a feeling where we were going. And I anticipated and predicted that we would go through a task force process and we would come to the same point that we were already leaning toward, which was the creation of an in-house automated collection system. But ultimately, we decided to go with a task force. So we impaneled a task force to take a look at that proposal, to weigh different options and different specific provisions of what that program would look like. And they came back with a set of recommendations to the council. Ultimately, it was exactly what I predicted, but at this point, I do value the work that task force did, just because they looked at certain details that, having a second set of eyes through that resident task force was useful in bringing us to fruition on that program. But that was something that we hadn't rolled out until after the change in government and after I'd taken on this role.
Well, one thing I would like to say is that I'm grateful that it was kept in-house because other municipalities were outsourcing it to, waste collection firms. And I think that, I'd rather have city employees who are in unions and whose jobs are protected by unions doing the work. I'm glad we got the new equipment. I think it's going to save a lot of backs. And I personally like rolling out the bins every week. I think and it's highly capital intensive. I would think that if it had been outsourced, it would have been very difficult to get it back in house because of the cost of all the equipment, the trucks and the robotics and all of that.
And we did get assistance. We were able to leverage some assistance for getting that equipment and the attendant sort of informational work that we needed to do in order to educate people about the changes in the process and the recycling process. There are pros and cons. One of the pros of outsourcing is that we're not responsible directly for whether or not the truck breaks down. The contracted collector is still responsible to come collect, under the contract, and whether or not their truck breaks down. Now, when it's in-house, and equipment fails, it happens and needs to be repaired. When those trucks break down, it impacts our service. Things take a little longer because we're using an older truck that maybe isn't automated in the same way, and maybe it's a front loader, something like that, and it's a little bit of a different system. And so there are pros and cons for keeping it in-house, but I think the pros, exactly what you talked about, respect for labor, making sure that people are well treated, well compensated, and respected here in the organization is a big one.
I'm glad you brought that up about when it's in house, it's the city's responsibility, and I appreciate that. And one question that's come up a lot as I've been going door to door is, I think people like, not everybody, but I think generally people like that the city's pretty reliable. If their garbage collection is on Monday, their garbage and recycling gets collected on Monday. But what I think a lot of people have said to me was, but what about the craft bags and the bulk? People aren't necessarily, or the leaves. I think people haven't always known when or have been surprised that the craft bags have been sitting there for quite a long time.
That's a good point. And that's something that has been a struggle when it comes to bulk in particular. We had to take a look, and we're still working to improve the bulk collection scheduling and that process. It used to be that the city would come around and they'd collect everything that you would throw on the lawn, on the tree lawn, pretty much no matter what. And, that became a bit cost prohibitive, especially with regard to staff time. Because as I said, we've been cutting. We've been, failing to maintain a level of staffing that allows for that level of service. And that's something that we had to build back up to. But so we adjusted the bulk schedule a bit, and we're still working through, and I think it'll be an iterative process to find what actually works, because people want to know, if I'm expecting it here, then I want it to be when I'm expecting it. It's just, it doesn't have to be bulk is collected every single week or every 2 weeks. The particular schedule maybe in a certain respect is less important than just the reliability of the schedule. And that's been a struggle. And part of that struggle has to do with equipment failures, staff injuries, those sorts of things that interrupt things. But then the other piece of it, and this is related, I think, as well to the lawn and leaf bags and the loose leaf pickup that we do twice a year. These things increase in a way, and they have increased in a way that we didn't predict. And so one of the things, we've got a lot of trees, and what we've noticed over time is that I think the combination of the number of trees we have with the changes in our climate cycles is that leaves falling is different than it used to be. The schedule of how the leaves actually fall has changed a bit. And what we're noticing is that the leaf falling and the snow seasons are combining a little bit more, and in a way that is difficult because historically the same equipment that we're using to pick up the leaves is the same equipment that we're using to plow the streets. And they have to do a switchover in order to go back and forth. And if you've got leaves piled up and then it snows, it's harder to remove those leaves. That kind of thing has made things difficult. And I think we're sort of in a transitional period from a climate perspective and also from an equipment investment perspective. We are going to need to adapt in this government. I think that's something that the next mayor is going to have to contend with. We are going to have to adapt, and that will probably require some additional investment in additional staffing, which we've been doing, investment in additional, possibly specialized equipment, which we've also started. One good example is the leaf vacuum. When I realized as a resident the method that Cleveland Heights has used to pick up leaves, with the large equipment that, scrapes them off of the ground and puts them into a dump truck, I was astonished because I'd never seen anything like what we do here. I was familiar with the leaf vacuum method, but the particular method that we use here was new to me when I was a new resident. And one of the reasons for that shift is because of the volume of leaves that we collect, and the speed with which they need to do it. And leaf vacuums are a bit slower, according to what I've been told. But additionally, it's compliance with what's in the pile of leaves. And one of the things that Cleveland Heights, and this is years back, the Cleveland Heights government realized is that the leaf vacuums were breaking on a repeated basis because they were sucking things up that were not supposed to be in a leaf pile. People were basically not compliant with the rules of throwing. And we're seeing that with recycling. We're seeing it with garbage as well. And that does make it difficult when you're trying to adhere to a particular process. So they abandoned the leaf vacuum method. And as mayor, I brought back as a pilot basically to see, okay, well, they used to break, but maybe we can create more compliance. Maybe the vacuum equipment is a bit more advanced and can withstand.
Well, I've noticed that, they take all the leaves and pile them up in the middle of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a process that they use to, eventually they suck them up, but they're kind of spread out over the road, and I actually kind of wondered why are they doing it this way now? Is that to when they do that they find foreign objects?
What do you see? I think so. One of the ways that they try to address this and try to create a more efficient method of batching the leaves in a place where it's more easily collected is by using blowers to blow those leaves off of the tree lawn into the street to prep and then coming by. And one of the things that you find is tree branches, sometimes construction debris, like rocks and bricks and, mounds of dirt in these piles of what is supposed to be leaves. Mm-hmm. And, Sometimes the blowing can help separate that a little bit, probably making it a little bit more efficient, but it's mainly for the consolidation of these, varieties of piles of lawn and leaf debris on the tree lawns of individual houses so that it can be collected a lot faster from the street instead of from each individual tree lawn. And so that's sort of been a change. I think the reintroduction of that leaf vacuum, so far, I believe it's been successful. And I'm hoping that we can expand on that through additional equipment purchases. But that's something that whoever comes next is going to have to contend with those investments in equipment and in investments in staff to run that equipment. And then most importantly, or at least as equally important, would be improvements in the process to make sure that we're doing it as quickly as possible. The bulk pickup is another one of those things. If maybe we're just doing it monthly because that's all we can reliably commit to, or that kind of thing, and sort of shortening the window of time within which someone puts a bulk item out on the right day and it gets collected as quickly as possible. You want to shorten that window of time. And that's going to require probably some more investment in equipment and probably sort of shifting what the scheduling is to find the right balance.
Well, if it's once a month, let's say, but there are times when people have to move out or their tenants have to move out.
Now, those are special bulk pickups, and that's a separate category of pickup.
Okay.
So there's the general bulk pickup that we have scheduled. We have it in our Public Works calendar, for people to take a look at, and we send those calendars out to every residence in the city.
Right. We have that calendar, and if we have bulk, we try to make sure that we wait until
bulk time.
Bulk time.
But with those special pickups, when you've got a tenant clean out, when you have somebody, we have a separate process for that. And you can find it on the website to schedule a special bulk pickup. The prices are relatively low, although that's something that we probably need to take a look at because we want to make sure that our refuse and recycling, which is an enterprise fund, a business type activity in our budgeting and reporting, that work needs to pay for itself to the degree that it can. And so for those special services, special bulk pickup, we do have, special refuse collection program. Well, that's a different question.
Well, I think you answered my question.
Yeah. So
because the question is just, I wanted to, because I have been asked this question, and people have seen, bulk that had been out there for a while, and that probably shouldn't happen. I'm sure that
a lot of what you're seeing are those tenant cleanouts.
Yeah.
When you've got a huge amount of bulk, and we're only allowed for our regular bulk pickup, I think 4 bulk items per regular bulk pickup. If you've got more, you need to schedule a special bulk pickup. And
or spread it out over a couple of months.
Spread it out over time, yeah. But the prices for a special bulk pickup is $10 per item.
Oh.
Now that's amazingly cheap. You've got a maximum 10 items in this particular, like for each order. But that would be additional bulk pickup, and those landlords, are required to go through that process or find some other way through a private hauler to get rid of that material. And what is supposed to happen when a landlord, puts all of those items out onto the tree lawn is, that's a violation. You're not supposed to just do that unless you are actively working to have that hauled away either through a private hauler or through special bulk pickup.
So if you're cleaning out a house and you're filling up contractor bags, let's say, would each contractor bag be $10?
So we don't, through our bulk pickup, I don't believe we pick up bagged garbage.
So that would wait for the next regularly scheduled.
But this is the key. So the way that our garbage collection works is that we have an automated garbage collection program. So each household has a bin or two, if they've purchased an additional one, that you fill up and you roll out. And the purpose of that is, we've got multiple purposes for that, not the least of which is what you said, saving employees' backs from the manual loading of sometimes extremely heavy bags. So a landlord, that's a business.
Mhm.
It is, a commercial activity in the city. And there are different requirements, I think, that should be placed on businesses that are operating, even if it is a residential tenancy business. So when it comes to a landlord having the respect for our community and not just dumping garbage on the tree lawn to sit there expecting that eventually somebody's going to come pick it up, that's actually a violation of our code and should be treated as such. And it has been. I mean, we send out inspectors to verify complaints. We issue those citations. We are required to provide an appropriate amount of time for the property owner to address the complaint, the violation. And then once that happens, we can take a number of other actions, whether it's sending it to a court, depending on the violation, or just attempting to address the nuisance abatement work ourselves through contracting to have somebody pick it up and then billing the property owner for that service. But all of that takes time and legally we're required for it to take time. There has to be some appropriate measure of time for the landlord to actually address the issue. Addressing it immediately is everybody's preference. If you live next door to a house and you've seen garbage on that tree lawn for 5 days, that's a problem for you. We're not necessarily in a position where we can address it as quickly as everyone who is impacted by it feels it should be addressed. But that might be something that can change as well, depending on regulatory changes here locally or questions about, due process in the courts and how much time a landlord is required to be given to address those things. We haven't been able to get there in the short time I've been in this role. But that's definitely something that I think next mayor, next council should take a look at and see if there's any way to shorten that time frame. See if there's any way to increase penalties for that kind of work instead of making it just a cost basis for, the nuisance abatement process, which sometimes property owners just ignore because maybe it'll go on the tax duplicate at some point, but that might take a while too. And by then, maybe they've transferred it to somebody else. So there are a lot of perverse incentives that are in place based on the system, not just here in Cleveland Heights, but statewide, that make it a little bit more difficult for the city government to enforce some of the things that I think everybody in Cleveland Heights knows should be enforced better. But that's just part of public works, and that's a big one. But there's more, and some of it is still related to climate too.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the other public works things that you have in mind.
So over the course of my time here, I've been really impressed by a lot of the work that the people in public works have been doing. But again, they've been operating at a deficit, whether it comes to the age, condition of their equipment, the condition, age, and number of employees. And I say condition as in, people get injured, people are off of work as a result. But I still see people doing really hard work and really good work. In public works, I think a really good example of that is the work that the director's been able to do. The director has just recently been given additional management capacity at the upper levels of the department through the addition of Tony Ferrone as an assistant director focused on operations, and then a new assistant director position that we filled with a woman named Virginia Carter, who is the AD focused on capital projects. And we've also added Eugene Cranford, who is our capital projects manager. Capital projects, I think that's the title, to assist with capital as well. Before those people were in place, Director Klingscale was shouldering a lot of that burden all on her own, and did, I think, admirable work under difficult conditions as a result. And that's why we had to create those positions, the assistant director position through some changes in our wage and salary ordinance, and then, of course, bringing on those people to increase management capacity at the top. And the reason for that is because we don't do everything in-house. When we're repaving a road, we're not doing it in-house. It's not our people doing the whole road repaving project. And so that requires somebody to be able to manage those contracts, manage those, the projects themselves. And that's a lot of work. People think that it's just you ask somebody to come and tell you what their price is, and that's the end of it. Then you pick them and they go do the work and you're done. It's not that simple. There is a lot of work that goes into that. And having that additional capacity in the upper level management in the Public Works Department has been and will continue to be, I think, beneficial for the city in its operation. But more than that, when I began as mayor in 2022, one of the first things that we had to deal with was a negotiation of our contract with Laborers Local 860. So in 2022, we worked with them to negotiate that contract. We entered into a 3-year contract, which was up this year. And I can't say enough good about that, the experience of working with Local 860 on that contract. But
And I was at the council meeting where the contract was ratified by council.
Yes.
Everybody seemed pretty happy.
And I think they should be. I think this is the renegotiation that we did this year, I think will benefit Cleveland Heights for years to come. But I'll say this for the 2022 process, and this is something that is probably a little bit counterintuitive for most people who work on the management side of a labor negotiation, and most people who would sit in the seat that I'm in right now. It'd be a little counterintuitive to think about it this way. I believe that the negotiation process in 2022 was flawed in one major important way. I believe that Laborers Local 860 were a little bit too nice, a little bit too generous. I'm not exactly certain why. I was there to work with them.
That's interesting coming from management's perspective.
Yeah.
Can you say more about?
Well, it's unusual. And it's unusual, and it's certainly, I think, probably an unusual stance to take when you are working with people who do the negotiation from the management perspective. It's hard for them to shift perspective and look at this as less an antagonistic relationship and more a cooperative relationship where you're both trying to get to an endpoint that works, as opposed to trying to get as much or give as little as you can. I walked into the negotiation in 2022 with a hope that we could work together and come to an endpoint that was mutually beneficial. I think that they negotiated. I'm not saying that they just rolled over, because they did not. And they got more, and we improved certain things in that contract, improved them for the workers in that contract. So I'm not saying that they did a bad job or anything like that negotiating with management, but I do think that in that process, what I missed and this is through, through experience that I've gained since then, I can recognize that I missed it at the time. I missed that part of this negotiation isn't just looking at budgets. It's not just looking at whether or not you sort of have a vague understanding about what a fair wage is. It's not just about looking at comparable organizations and seeing if you're giving more than them or less than them in terms of wages and benefits for the workers. It's also about what you hope to achieve, what your outcomes should be. And if you focus on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve for the people that you're serving, then your calculation changes a little bit. And what I mean by that is if you can get somebody to agree to take a lower level of wage, and you feel like your job is done at that point, and you don't recognize that what you might also be doing is changing your competitiveness as an employer, as someone who can recruit and retain quality employees. If you don't recognize that there are negative, potentially ramifications for the organization by, playing hardball a little bit too much, then you're missing the big picture and you're just focused on haggling. This isn't about haggling. Ultimately, the goal should be providing the best service we can for the people of Cleveland Heights. And that was something that I think I missed in that first negotiation process in 2022. So in 2025, I went into it with that perspective, recognizing that what Cleveland Heights needs to do is focus on the end goal, the actual goal, the philosophical goal almost, before deciding what your approach is going to be when it comes to the staff members who make a reality your hopes and dreams about snowplowing. Everybody wants all of the streets clear, 20 minutes after it starts snowing, even if it's still snowing, right? But that's not necessarily a possibility. And it's certainly not a possibility if you are unable to be a more competitive employer who is investing in the equipment and investing in the people who actually get the work done. Nobody negotiating on the management side is getting in one of those plows and clearing the streets for the residents of Cleveland Heights, right?
I see what you mean. Yeah.
And, so I can think about my own importance in that negotiation process, but ultimately what I want to make happen is that the streets get cleared. And I'm not doing that myself, so I have to have respect for the people who actually are. And I think in all likelihood, so I think next year, maybe, I'm trying to think if it's next year or the year after, there's going to be additional negotiations. These are 3-year cycles. Generally, we've got 3 to 4, depending on how you look at it, bargaining units in this organization so far. And
so you have 860 for the public works.
Local 860 for public works and for parks and recreation employees. There are certain parks and recreation employees that are members of Local 860 as well. And you've got the IAFF for fire. And you've got Ohio Patrolmen Benevolence Association that is broken up into 2 for the brass and for the patrol for policing. So those are the bargaining units that we work with to negotiate working conditions and wages and benefits and those sorts of things. I anticipate and I hope for, frankly, without getting too involved in it, I hope for an expansion of organizing in Cleveland Heights workforce. I know that it's probably rare for management to think that way, but I think that it could simplify certain things that can get complicated. If we had more employees within a bargaining unit, then negotiating those wages and having that kind of conversation and making those changes, in a certain respect, is simplified. single point of contact in that negotiation or single set of people that you're in contact with in that negotiation. Less in the way of unilateral changes to a wage and salary ordinance, for instance. So I think it's worthwhile for employees here to seriously consider unionizing if they are not currently part of a bargaining unit.
And which employees are not currently part of the bargaining unit?
So there are a bunch. So the bargaining units do take up a lot of our permanent staffing. So when it comes to the number of employees that are covered under a labor agreement, I think the majority of our permanent employees are covered. Because police is
Police, fire,
about
public works,
100,
and parks
you know,
and recreation.
fire is maybe I think we're looking at a little over 80. And public works and parks and recreation, a portion of parks and recreation staff as well. I'd have to get back to you on the exact number. But it would be a substantial increase. There are, certainly over 100, maybe as much as, not quite as much as 200 permanent employees that are not covered under a bargaining agreement. So, but I don't want to give you, that's not firm.
That's fine.
The numbers. But I think in 2025, working with Local 860, I was a little bit more expansive in my approach because I know that not only does it benefit the workers and more fairly compensate them for the hard work that they do, but in the long term, it also means that the city of Cleveland Heights is a more attractive employer with more ability to recruit and retain. And we know that we've got an aging workforce in certain jobs, and we want to make sure that we are bringing in new people in order to replace people who will eventually be retiring. I mean, it's just a fact. And so that's why you need to take a look at the end goal and the long-term goals of things like a bargaining unit negotiation process. So, but that goes back to all of the other work that Public Works does. The snow plowing, the pothole filling, and those things are changing. That's another thing that I'm sure some people don't want to recognize because they don't want to admit that the climate crisis is a real thing. Other people might not want to admit that it has an impact in certain ways because of whatever their reasons are. But snow plowing, for instance, we can imagine that changes in weather patterns due to climate change have an impact on how much snow we get, when we get it. The energy behind storms, which has an impact both on snowfall, but also on things like trees coming down that forestry or other crews from Public Works have to deal with. And then also potholes. When we've got a winter where the freeze-thaw cycles were more frequent than we've experienced before.
Yeah, the ice expands the material.
Yeah, so everything. Yeah, and that's not something, it's happening relatively quickly. And that's been our experience. And we have not figured out a way to adapt to that as quickly as it's happening. And I think that's something that we saw at the beginning of this year, because when you're trying to fill potholes with cold patch, you can fill it. But certainly if you have to plow again, that patch is coming up. And cold patch is not as effective as hot patch, which we are not allowed, we can't actually get until, April or thereabouts. It was a little bit more complicated because of the budgetary process that we went through at the beginning of this year.
Why can't you get the hot patch before April?
Not available.
Okay.
Yeah. When the weather turns and the asphalt plants open back up and start delivering hot patch, hot patch is something you have to, maintain at a temperature in order for it to be effective. the method for applying hot patch requires that the factories that produce the hot patch open when they open. And if we are experiencing a level of degradation in our roads as a result, before those plants open, as a result of this freeze-thaw cycle increase, then we're going to have major problems. Now, I can't predict the weather, over this winter. I'm not going to pretend. So I don't know if it's going to be the same as it was last year. But if it follows that pattern, there are going to be similar problems next year. And that's something to get ahead of now that we know that it's an issue that exists. That might require, additional road paving, but that has to be planned for. It may require additional crack sealing. Also should be planned for because you want to make sure you are maximizing on the impact of that investment. One of the things that I've suggested, and I'm hoping we might be able to do before the year is out, or certainly, put into a next year's budget, would be to add equipment to our refuse and recycling trucks, which travel our city. I've said this, in various meetings, but they travel our city every week. They're on every road, pretty much. And there's equipment that we used as a service to grade the condition of our roads using LiDAR instead of just eyeballing it. Mm-hmm. Or I don't want to, denigrate the expertise.
What's LiDAR?
LiDAR is, radar. You send a sound wave out, it bounces back, that there's an object there, right? It can be more or less sensitive to provide more or less detail about the object that sound wave bounces back from. LiDAR is similar, except that it uses lasers, I believe, that, are, shot out. They get a read about what they are impacting, and that is reflected back to sensors that get very extremely detailed picture of, the environment that laser has interacted with. When it comes to roads, what that means is that you can map the condition of a road at an intensely detailed level. So you can see cracks that are forming that maybe you can't even see with your eyes. And all of that is fed into a system that can analyze the data that it's receiving and give you a really good idea of a very detailed condition of any particular road. So you can see that, okay, this road, we paved it 3 years ago. There are cracks occurring here and here. We want to make sure that
Is that on our trucks yet, or is that something you're looking at?
This is something that I've been looking at for the last couple of years now. We did that pilot project where we hired a service that uses this technology to map our roads, to get a different, more objective read on our road conditions. And that's how we graded our roads, the condition of our roads in this last go-round for our road program. It used to be that we would go out and we would look at every road. A person would go out and look at every road, and that's not saying that person doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't know what they're looking at. But this provides a little bit of a different perspective on condition grading, more objective, ostensibly, and provides a lot more information than maybe the human eye can see. So, what I'd like to do, though, is in an ongoing way, if we can procure that as an investment, procure that equipment, instead of a periodic service that we would use to grade our roads, we need to get up-to-date information about the condition of every road on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, and address issues that come up maybe before somebody has the ability to even report it to us. If we know a pothole is there before somebody damages their tire on it, all the better. Having that information and being able to act quickly on it, I think will go a long way to improving the quality of life for people in Cleveland Heights. That's not something that we've been able to get accomplished yet, but we're still investigating that possibility. I think it's a great idea. If we can't get that done this year, then again, whoever's next, I hope pursues something like that in order to address some of the issues that we've been facing.
And are there any other areas of public works that we haven't, that you haven't addressed?
Yeah, so a lot of this in public works has to do with some of the work that we've been doing on wages. So the divisions in public works, we've got refuse and recycling. We've got streets. Oh, I can just pull it up, actually. What am I doing? Let's see. So refuse and recycling, we've got our sewer utility, our streets division, and forestry, our forestry workers as well. And I think all of these divisions do great work. One more, vehicle maintenance, I think is in there too. Forestry, refuse, recycling, sewer utilities. We got snow removal and street maintenance, and capital projects. But we've got vehicle maintenance in public works as well. And in all of those divisions and all of those functions, we are competing with private organizations. In forestry, we've got private, arborist companies, forestry companies that do work. Sometimes we find employees that, come from private. Sometimes our employees go to a private organization. And the same you see with sewer utility. You've got your private organizations that, are contracted to perform sewer work for residents. We've been trying to figure out how to get the word out a little bit better about how our sewer utility services can be used by residents as a first call before going with the private organization. And because you can save thousands of dollars if you just call us first and have sewer utilities scope your sewer to check on
Is
your
that
problem.
still $100?
It's still $100 for a sewer clean out, although that doesn't even pay the cost of the service. And out of all of our funds, and we've got a bunch of them, there are two funds that are enterprise funds that I've mentioned before, and that's sewer and refuse and recycling. Those two functions of government are the only two enterprise funds we have. And what that means is that, the goal and the expectation is that our sewer function and our refuse and recycling function pay for themselves based on the direct funding that they receive, either through the assessment or the fees for services. And so we want to make sure that we keep a careful and close eye on those fees, because otherwise we get ourselves into a predicament like we did with our water system. Do you remember the water system issues that we had about 10 years ago?
I wasn't living in Cleveland Heights at the time, but
You probably heard about it. It was pretty big.
refresh my memory.
Yeah, so we discovered that after years of neglecting a gradual increase in water service fees, and instead just not wanting to rock the boat, I guess, this is conjecture in terms of the motivation, but there was a lack of a gradual increase in water use fees. Now, that water utility was an enterprise fund too, and was expected to pay for itself. So you pay for the service, because we bought water wholesale from the city of Cleveland and we sold it retail to the residents of Cleveland Heights. That's how that worked at the time. And we weren't increasing our prices. Now, an enterprise fund is a business type activity. And so you want to focus not only on your operational costs, but also on your, larger capital needs. Those things that you need to focus on that aren't specific to the immediate provision of the water, but you need to address it or you're going to cause yourselves problems. And that's what we did. We caused ourselves a problem. I think at the end there, we were estimating around 60% of the water that we were purchasing from the city of Cleveland was going directly into the ground because of all of the breaks in our delivery system, the capital improvements that had been neglected in our water system. The amount of leakage that we had out of our water system was 60% of the water that we were purchasing wholesale from the city of Cleveland. Now that's a problem, clearly. And it's the result of a lack of a gradual increase as costs increase, as capital needs arise. You want to be able to address those things in an ongoing way instead of having to do something dramatic in order to address long deferred maintenance. We failed at that. And so toward the beginning of my time on council, we had to do something. The city manager at the time floated this idea of turning over, at least in part, our water system to a private firm. And as you can imagine, many people in the city of Cleveland Heights did not love that idea. And they let us know. Now, I knew immediately that it was not going to be a good idea. And the reason for that is we can talk about some portion of our public infrastructure being turned over to a private company.
It's privatization and all the labor issues that go with that.
We lose a whole hell of a lot of control over that infrastructure, taking it out of public hands.
You're transferring to a for-profit rather than a for-service.
And water is one of those things that we as humans need. Clean, accessible water, that is a human need. And in my view, it's a human right. You know, clean, affordable, accessible water.
Yeah.
And so taking that private is of very much concern to me generally. And ultimately we didn't. But we had basically two choices that would make any kind of sense from that perspective, the perspective of water as a human right. And that was either keep it in-house, which would mean a massive amount of investment from the city of Cleveland Heights to fix the infrastructure issues that we had deferred for so long. And that would also likely require massive contribution from ratepayers. Now, ultimately, what we decided to do was not keep it in-house locally, but keep it public by, turning that system, our local water system, back over to the city of Cleveland to manage. There was a transitional period where Cleveland Heights residents paid an additional fee to offset some of the additional infrastructure costs that Cleveland would have to face by taking that back on. That has since dropped off our bills. But this is going to be ongoing work, and the city of Cleveland will have to manage its water fees in light of the ongoing, continuing need for a reinvestment in the capital assets that are.
And because it's back in the hands of the city of Cleveland, that's why it's not one of the enterprise funds.
Exactly. But given that we have those two other enterprise funds related to garbage collection, recycling collection, and our sewer utility, because we still have a local sewer utility that has infrastructure in our ground that we need to maintain, that we provide service to remove storm and sanitary sewer waste away from people's houses. That's why things like that $100 fee for a sewer clean out, we need to, every so often take a look at those fees. Understand that they need to be right-sized over time. Nobody likes increasing fees. We just need to make sure that these funds are solving. And it's the same for our sewer fees generally. We are likely going to be facing some increases in our sewer fees. Bringing that analysis back to council, we've been, expecting to do that this year. Actually, I was hoping to do it last year so that we can have a more gradual entry into sewer fee increases. But We got some analysis done. Some of the work that we have to do under the consent decree, that's going to be a big deal coming next. We've still got work to do. I think we've done, excuse me, a really good job working, at least now, working with the EPA and DOJ on that partial consent decree. That's something that people are going to have to get up to speed on if they want to be mayor of this city, because that work will only have to increase.
And the consent decree, just refresh mine and whoever's watching what that was.
Absolutely. So quite a while ago, the EPA came to the city of Cleveland Heights and said, hey, Cleveland Heights, the sewer system that you have is in violation of the Clean Water Act. Even though it's not combined in the strictest sense, a combined sanitary and storm sewer system, in that it's not single pipe, it is single trench. And it was built 100 years ago, before the Clean Water Act came into existence. And it was ingenious at the time. It was cost effective because you could dig a single trench into the bedrock, but you would create two paths, one for storm and one for sanitary sewer within that single trench. But when you have massive rain events, that's when you get mixture.
Right. Combined sewage overflow.
Exactly.
Right.
And you want to avoid that under the Clean Water Act. You want to eliminate those where you can under the Clean Water Act. And the EPA came to Cleveland Heights and said, you need to do some work. And the city of Cleveland Heights, I wasn't around at the time, either on council or in any other role, but my understanding is that the city of Cleveland Heights maybe ignored the federal government when they came calling to some degree. Now, I don't know specifics. I don't know what contact was actually made or anything like that. I don't want to disparage anybody unnecessarily. But enough communication was not made, was not done, that the EPA got the Department of Justice into the mix, and we were threatened with a consent decree. I think the dollar figure that they were looking at was $500 million of work that needed to be done according to their estimates in order to fix the problem. Now, that's a lot. $500 million under our current budget is 5 years of our entire budget. That would bankrupt the city.
Yeah.
There's no way that we can do that.
Very few cities can.
Of course,
These
yeah.
are
And frankly, the larger the city that might have more financial wherewithal.
we have more sewers.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the problem grows. And in our case, it's just an impossibility. And to her credit, Tanisha Briley, the city manager at the time, she engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And the administration here in Cleveland Heights was able to modify, well, first of all, repair the relationship a bit between the city and the EPA and DOJ, and modify the demand a bit in a way that I think is I don't know, to be complimented. Mm-hmm. Instead of this estimate, $500 million or thereabouts that the city would have to spend, how about instead the consent decree allows us to investigate what the actual problem is instead of this higher level estimate that isn't based necessarily in the actual physical reality of the sewer system under the ground. Let us investigate and repair as we investigate so that we can get the real dollar figure that we would have to spend in order to be in compliance with the Clean Water Act. And that negotiation, that process was successful to the point where we're under this partial consent decree where we are doing this in a dual track way, where we're investigating our sewer system, we're finding those problems, and we are also working to correct them as we find them, so that at the end of this process, we have a much better understanding of the reality of our sewer system, all of the problems within it, and what it will take to fix and then maintain that sewer system. We're going to be in much better shape and have a much better knowledge set of this sewer system, which is a labyrinth under the ground and very difficult to just have a complete understanding of. We'll have a much better understanding at the end of this process than we do even now. We've got a much better understanding than we did then. So that's the process that we're in now. ARPA was an immense help. Back before the change in government, the expectation, my expectation, certainly as a council member, was that we would expend out of that 39 or thereabouts $1 million of ARPA funding that we were allocated, that we would spend about $28 million on sewers. We only ended up spending around 18 or so. And the expectation was that we would take sort of a phased approach. There's that first 18, and then we would add 10. And that $28 million figure was based on our estimate of how much actual sewer work we could get under contract and expended by the deadline for ARPA, which is the end of next year for the spending, for the expenditure of those dollars. Now, ultimately, after the change in government, council decided that we were not going to expend those dollars on sewer, and sort of the time frame for how those dollars would be spent was changed a little bit as well. I think this will probably speak to the next mayor's experience of being the mayor in Cleveland Heights. When I say that I was able to see how other jurisdictions, how other municipalities dealt with ARPA. And I saw a dramatic change, a dramatic difference between other cities' approach to how ARPA funding was determined versus Cleveland Heights. There was a degree of ownership of the decision-making process for ARPA dollars in particular that was taken by council, by the city council, that I didn't see in other cities. So in many other cities that I was watching, the administration and the mayor in particular had a vision for how ARPA dollars would be spent, and made a proposal. And, maybe there was collaboration on that vision, and council's perspectives were taken into account and that kind of thing. But the person who was really leading that process was the mayor in those cities. Came with a proposal, and in many occasions, council got on board with that vision, which makes sense. At least it made sense in those jurisdictions. Here, though, I was given very clear information that council was driving this, this particular initiative, and would be taking ownership and making those decisions about how ARPA dollars should be spent. That didn't mean that they did not accept certain proposals that I brought to council for the spending of certain amounts of money. But, and I appreciate that. I don't want to discount that. But it was a dramatically different process. And if it were up to me and in accordance with my vision, I probably would have put more money into our sewer system. And there's a very, very important reason for that. Ultimately, we all use the sewers. Ultimately, we all pay for them, whether it's directly as homeowners or indirectly as renters that we are, it's going to be included in your rent in some way. And so we are all subject to the necessary increases in sewer rates that will then go to fund the sewer improvements that we are going to be required to make. Sewer rates will increase as a result of the capital improvements that need to be made according to federal law. It's unavoidable. What we could avoid is a level of sewer rate increase, or the time frame when it comes to those sewer rate increases that will impact all of us and will have an especially detrimental impact on people with lower incomes or fixed incomes when those sewer rate increases hit. And so from my perspective, putting more ARPA dollars into our sewer system means that we can forestall and decrease the amount of sewer rate increases that will be necessary to fulfill this requirement.
So you mentioned some numbers, 39 million, 28 million, and 18 million. The 18 million was what we did spend from our dollars?
The 18 million is what we ended up allocating.
Not spend on ARPA, get in ARPA dollars.
We're still in the process of, getting that money all out the door because projects are still ongoing. So 28 is what we planned to spend when we were first discussing the possibility of the use of these ARPA dollars. 28 million is what we plan to spend on these necessary sewer improvements. That's an additional $10 million of sewer work that removes that $10 million of sewer work from burdening the sewer ratepayers.
Yeah. Speaking of ARPA, there's other ARPA money out there. And I know at least some of it is, maybe we can segue to Parks and Recreation.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of it's in Parks and Recreation. Can you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So some of the restrictions on ARPA dollars, it was a bit of an interesting process because not all of the guidance on it was cemented as we started working through allocating this money. But the deadlines were in stone. So we weren't exactly sure about the nature of all of the requirements and what specifically they applied to and what things fit within and what things did not fit within the allowable uses of this money. But certain things were, and certain outdoor activity improvements and allowing for safer use of outdoor space because we were dealing with a respiratory virus and being indoors collected, increased the spread of the virus and that kind of thing. And so in Parks and Recreation, a couple of the things that we spent ARPA dollars on were related to physical activity or convening the public in ways that is less likely to spread a respiratory virus, a contagious respiratory virus. And so things like the ARPA dollars that we spent on the rebuild of now Sean Sullivan Field at Denison Park. The money that we spent from ARPA also included, finally, the installation of the splash pad at Denison. Also, the work that we did that we're doing currently in Kane Park to create more public convening space that can be connected to the Taylor Road Business District and increasing accessibility into Kane Park.
I think that's a lot of people have been asking a lot about that lately.
Yeah.
So I guess what people were expecting was a special ramp for people with mobility disabilities.
Yeah.
And people are saying, when I'm knocking on doors, they're saying, what happened to that? And where's our sledding hill?
Yeah.
And where is our sledding hill?
So two things. And I know this is, I don't know that it's unique to Cleveland Heights. I've never been a mayor of another city. So I can't compare in that way. But I have noticed that even when there is information available in the form of videos from public meetings where changes were discussed, like with council, before the changes were made, or the write-ups in the news about that meeting and how those changes were going to take place and why. Rumor mills still spin out of control. And so you have to address things. Sometimes you don't know how many things to address in how many forums, because social media can be a bit unwieldy when it comes to misinformation. But thank you for asking this question. First, Sledding Hill is not going away. Anybody who deals with construction projects knows that the beginning of a construction project is not going to look like the end result. The example that keeps coming up in my head is if you're building a house and you've got this rendering of this house, and you're looking at this rendering and you see it's a 3-story house. You can see it goes from the ground up 3 stories. And when you see them start building this house, though, they're digging. I mean, if you didn't know the process for digging a foundation or adding a basement to a house before you build it, you might be really, really concerned that this expectation that you had about a house that was above ground, 3 stories, why are you going down?
Right, but people are also looking at what was definitely, it's not going to be part of the sledding hill anymore. The seating.
The seating area, and this is the thing that I think people should recognize.
And what is it seating for?
It's for a few things, and this is something that was discussed in the public meetings before the changes were made too, or the public meeting with council before the changes were made too. But before I get there, I want people to recognize that sometimes you need to just give yourself a moment, avoid catastrophizing, and try to think about it. You can think about it if, what's the worst possible, reason or outcome, but then maybe think about what a better outcome could be as well, right? And so allow yourself the space for something that's a bit more measured. That's my ask for people when they think about things like this. So when we initially conceived of the Stramp, this was in relation to a really exciting Taylor Road Business District revitalization plan that was proposed by WXZ in their response to our request for proposals about the Taylor Tudor historic rehabilitation project. They came with a Taylor Tudor rehabilitation, but then also had this vision for what the Taylor Road Business District could become. Across the street from Taylor Tudor, we've got a strip center, different shops. I think there's a service organization as well that's housed there. And this vision included a dramatic change in that strip center in particular. Demolishing it, building a sort of a modern version, a modern mirror to the Taylor Tudor buildings, in that they would be built up higher. It'd be mixed use like the Taylor Tudor buildings are, with commercial, possibly with office use, with residential use, in that sort of more modern mirror on the other side of Taylor, with parking instead of being, a surface parking lot on the street, which we know does not engender a great deal of walking traffic, foot traffic, and energy on a street in a business district. The parking would be moved behind and would be multi-layered, a parking structure behind. Another part of that vision was taking Kane Park, which if you're just looking at that particular side of Kane Park as a sledding hill, then it's useful when?
Well, you sled in the winter, but you ride your bike down the hill, you hang out in the summer.
So, yeah.
I was at yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But the idea is, how do we take a business district that is revitalized and make Kane Park a part of it? How do we make it more connected? And part of the way is to make it easier to get in, easier to be at the business district, get something from there, and then hang out at the park. Make it more inviting. Because right now, or the previous state, the ways to get into Kane Park from the Taylor Road side was a relatively steep.
There was a steep one on one side and a less steep one.
Less steep, but still too steep for certain users of the park. Certainly too steep to be in compliance with the grade requirements for ADA accessibility.
Was it non-compliant?
Yeah.
With ADA? Okay.
Oh, yeah. So, coupled with this desire to create a landing place, a place for people to convene, intentional, and with the ability to, allow for programming of that side in the way that we used to. In the old days, that hill was a space for performances, for people to gather and watch art happen. And we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from it in part because of additional options for entertainment, the addition of more and more acts at the Evans and the Alma and so on and so forth. But the goal with the Stramp was not to just provide an ADA accessible path, but to provide something that could be a path in, a more accessible path in, but also a convening space that could connect the business district with Kane Park. Because the Taylor Road Business District has been neglected by the city for a long time, just like several other places in our community. This would be a way to revitalize and bring Kane Park into that connection. So that was the ultimate purpose of this. What we found when we went from that initial concept to actual engineering work is that the number of trees that we would have had to take down, the potential destabilization of the hill on the north side of Kane Park, on the Taylor Road side, where that really steep hill, the steep path is, the destabilization and the impact on the neighboring property at the Taylor Road Synagogue. It was going to be extremely detrimental, and the amount of concrete that we would have had to pour and the number of trees that we would have had to take down on that side was dramatic. And so we needed to shift something because the actual slope of that hill and the design of the Stramp had to be modified so much, and it would have been just a sea of concrete on that side.
I think early on I saw the plans for the Stramp being on that side. Is the Stramp now on the other side?
So this is what we had to do in order to allow for both that convening space, the expansion potentially of programmed art in our arts park, and the connection to the business district, while also including additional entry into the park that's more accessible. We had to separate them a bit. We wanted to maintain both of those improvements. And so that seating area on the north side of the park is maintained in a different way through that tiered seating. And it will also have stairs that are, within that design, and you can see it in the renderings. But then there is that switchback path that allows for a gentler slope that is ADA compliant, that is accessible.
On the north side?
That would be on the south side.
On the south, okay.
So, walking through, you can stop there. There's ADA seating at the top and the bottom, because if we do programming at the bottom of that hill, you want people to be able to come from either direction if they're in a wheelchair or a motorized scooter or something like that, from either direction, either at the top or the bottom, and not be excluded from those sorts of programs in that way. But then also we wanted to make sure that that switchback path allowed entry into the park from Taylor for people with those mobility issues as well. But I want to make sure people know, I think the sledding hill, it's a popular thing. Now, snow is less.
I got my first flexible flyer when I was probably 4 years old on that sledding hill.
See, I grew up, I was on the East Cleveland side.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would go to Forest Hill. We would sled at Forest Hill.
It's a bigger hill.
It's a bigger hill, yeah.
Steeper hill.
It is. But
when we were lucky, we could get a parent to drive us there and do the more heavy-duty stuff, yeah.
Well, this is the thing. The sledding hill isn't going away. I think what you see right now is impacted a little bit more than you expect based on the renderings, because there is a construction path that was necessary to have in order to construct the switchback path. So we've got equipment that is using that construction path, which ultimately will be a part of the width of the sledding hill. But right now, it doesn't quite look that way. We've also, through this discussion, through this design, we're trying to improve the excitement of the sledding hill a little bit, not, making it more dangerous or unacceptable for younger kids or anything like that, but maybe increasing the slope a little bit to make it a little bit more exciting for the kids. But the sledding hill is not going away.
It's going to be narrower, apparently.
Probably slightly, but I would say slightly. I think looking at it right now, the previous iteration of that sledding hill is maybe 130 feet wide. And
I mean, before they did anything, 130
before they did anything. And I'll say maybe because most people cluster a little bit more toward the center anyway. But the reason why is because there were trees where that seating is, there were trees. On the other side, where the switchback path starts, there were also trees.
Yeah.
And people weren't sledding from where those trees were. And so sort of, having a realistic memory of where you actually sledded on the Kane Park sledding hill is going to be important in terms of judging what comes next as well. But that, I think, is a really good example of not everybody likes change generally, right? Many people just don't. This change in particular, people can have an opinion of it one way or another. Some people will predict the future and say nobody's ever going to use that seating. I hope they're wrong. I anticipate that they're wrong, especially if the city intentionally programs events using it.
My daughter was in an event, I don't know if you'd call it a play, kind of a play, that Artful did, not this summer, but the summer before. And a lot of people gathered there to see it.
Exactly.
It was one of Robin Van Leer's productions.
Yeah. I remember we had to authorize the use of that space.
Sure.
I think we maybe tried to provide some sort of equipment for them to use or something like that, or connection to electricity. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, that right there is a really good example of more and more things that can happen.
My sister and brother-in-law, who are older than I am, they enjoyed it, but they were sitting on the park bench at the top of the hill rather than further down on the grass where a lot of us were sitting.
And that makes sense. And it's fine. Lawn seats are fine. But if you've got that seating area that can be used, and at the bottom you've got more accessible seating area, and at the top you've got more accessible seating area, that allows for an increased number of people who are able to enjoy it in different ways. And so I'm hoping that things like that Artful performance can happen more and more often in Cleveland Heights. Over at Peace Park, for instance, they've got that stage. You can sit on the hill and watch performances. That doesn't have to be the only place, and I don't think it should be, especially when we have an arts park right between Taylor and Lee. So,
any other park and rec related
ARPA dollar spending?
ARPA or other things that was on your agenda to talk about?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much to discuss. But just briefly running through, we spent quite a bit of ARPA money on the rebuild of the North Rink. I don't know if...
So the North Ramp.
North Rink.
Oh, North Rink.
Right. So when I became mayor, we were in the middle of COVID.
Right.
Or maybe kind of at the end, but we were still in the middle of COVID as an endemic, I guess. But at the time, all of these things were closed. The rink was closed, and there were really good reasons for the closure of those ice rinks that had nothing to do with COVID. And one of the major reasons was the condition of the infrastructure of the rinks. On the North Rink side, that wasn't designed well, and it was not built well. It was built in a way that invited problems.
The North Rink.
The North Rink.
Yeah, because that's the new one.
That's the new one. Olympic-sized rink, which is great. You know, at the time when it was added to the community center, there was a large hockey and ice sports contingent in the city of Cleveland Heights, and that's changed over time, which is understandable. Things go in cycles and waves. Things ebb and flow in popularity. And so, but that was built in a way that the design of it and the build caused problems down the road. Additionally, the South Rink is very old. And
I skated there when I was a kid.
there are major problems. There were major problems with both of those rinks. You know, it's very difficult to imagine that you wouldn't experience some problems when you've got metal tubing that brine is being washed through to keep
Yeah.
ice cold,
Well,
right?
I remember when it was built, so
Yeah,
I can tell you approximately how old it is. I won't say.
that's fine. but so these are major issues that ultimately we couldn't repair. We couldn't repair our way back to efficient operation of those rinks. And so we spent, I think, maybe $2 million on the North Rink. And we focused on the North Rink instead of the South Rink because we knew that the way that that was designed, excuse me, it was problematic. But it was also larger, which meant that more possible use of that rink was allowed, whether it's this Olympic speed skating work or additional hockey use. Just it's a larger rink, so it has more utility. So we focused on the North Rink to rebuild. We spent $2 million of ARPA funds to do it.
And what's the status?
Currently, of the North Rink,
Yeah.
it's in operation.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's operating as a working rink. It's not like there weren't hiccups in the rebuild. I remember when we were just about done, there were people telling us that we didn't need to test it before we opened it up to the public. I had some people telling me, I think the director at the time was saying that we didn't need to test it. I had another person in Parks and Rec staff who was saying, yeah, we probably need to test this. And ultimately what we found is when we turned the thing on, there was, I wouldn't call it an explosion or anything like that, but there was definitely a malfunction that ruined the ice and caused a problem and needed to be repaired. So we definitely needed to test it, right?
Mhm.
But we worked through those problems and ultimately got it up and running, and it is in operation.
So
now.
it's ready for the hockey season. It's
It's been ready.
the ice.
No,
Is
it's
the ice
working.
on?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that was I think a dramatic improvement, even if people can't necessarily see all of the improvement that took place underground. It was a total rebuild. We dug everything out. Everything's new.
And you worked out the bugs from
Worked out the bugs.
explosion.
And that doesn't mean there won't be problems that come up, but those will need to be addressed quickly and efficiently to make sure that they don't become larger problems.
Mm-hmm.
We changed the cooling system and all of the sort of the backroom stuff that supports an ice rink as well, and it's in great condition and it's working. The South Rink, however, in order to turn that back into an operational ice rink, probably around the same amount of investment would need to take place. And the reason for that is because it's a very old rink. It is, I've been told, now I don't study ice rinks professionally, but I've been told that turning that back on could cause a catastrophic failure.
So what's the status currently?
Current status is that it's being used for a variety of other purposes. We've got roller derby teams that are in there that have been working with the city of Cleveland Heights for a few years. So the official home of the Cleveland Guardians roller derby.
Is it ready for? Are we doing competitive roller derby there yet?
That's what it is. Yeah, we've had teams from all over the country come
Okay.
and do tournaments there. We also have, and I got to give a lot of credit to one of the staff over at the community center, Mike DeCenzo. If you know Parks and Rec in Cleveland Heights, you know Big Mike. And he has been phenomenal for a very long time. First of all, on a personal level, I love Big Mike. But also, I value his contribution to this organization so much. And he also he brought in the roller derby teams when the rink was not operating as an ice rink. He brought in accessible I think football league that is affiliated with the Cleveland Browns to do work there too. And that kind of creative re-envisioning of a space is important when you run into these problems. But ultimately, I think the Parks and Recreation Board, which is a board that council appoints to, and their charge is to provide recommendations to city council for Parks and Recreation, policies, ideas, those sorts of things. It's sort of a vestige of the old government, because when you think about some of these boards and commissions, you would expect that they would be giving recommendations to the administration and the council, because we should be working together. But in this case, that hasn't been brought up for adjustment in that way.
Well, it's not a private recommendation. If it's, if they're making the recommendation to the council,
They certainly can.
anybody, mayor,
Anybody can
somebody
listen.
who lives down the street,
Yeah.
anybody would know.
And in this case, they made a recommendation for the South Rink.
Mhm.
I don't know that this has gotten a lot of press or publicity, but they made a recommendation for the South Rink. And the South Rink recommendation was that they turn it to an indoor turf field. Now, the rationale for that is, of course, an indoor turf field is infinitely less expensive to maintain than an ice rink. There's also less demand locally for the use of an ice rink than there used to be. And that's not to say that there isn't still substantial demand and passion about ice sports in the city of Cleveland Heights. I don't want anybody to think that I've got the
There are.
well, there's definitely passion too, but a lot of the interest in using our rinks also comes from outside of the community too.
Well, we're not in a vacuum. We're
not in a vacuum.
Our teams compete with other teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what I think one of the focuses that they had when making this recommendation was thinking about what sports do the kids in Cleveland Heights want to play? What are the more egalitarian sports that we can think of too? Because some of these sports can be very expensive to play. Some of them can be less expensive to play. I'd say equestrian sports are probably not something that we would think of as the most egalitarian, even though there are people of all economic backgrounds who participate in that. It can be an expensive sport to play. It's the same with ice sports. The equipment, that work can be that play can be a little bit daunting economically. It's a little bit different for somebody who can, go get a soccer ball and play soccer kind of thing. That's a little bit more accessible for many people. But more than that, it's a question of where the interest lies. And I don't know, and I don't want to speak for the Recreation Board, but I believe that those were some of the calculations that they made when approaching this recommendation. So who's playing? The kids in Cleveland Heights, what do we think they want? What could be useful? But then also there were questions about the cost benefit of a turf field when it comes to providing indoor space for off-season training for lacrosse, soccer, football, baseball, wide variety of field sports that kids play nowadays. Bringing the school district in to be able to practice, the soccer team or their field hockey or something like that in the winter. Mm-hmm. So I think that, is part of the recommendation. And here's where additional creativity comes in. Big Mike heard that recommendation, and
The
we've
turf
been
for
talking
the
about
turf
it.
field.
Yeah, for the indoor turf field, and recognized that we could have kind of a best of both worlds in a certain respect by maybe installing a turf field, but also having a hard surface that we can temporarily, like a removable hard surface that we can use to continue to allow for accessible football or roller derby, on an as needed basis, right? Because that's a possibility too. There are systems like that. So that's sort of where the conversation has led thus far, is converting it to turf field. I know some people were thinking about the possibility of using that space to construct an indoor pool as well. I think there's a better option.
Speaking of which, what's the status of getting residents over to Heights High to swim in that pool?
I think the first step in that discussion and finding out is to ask the school board if they would be willing to let residents use the high school pool. And they say repeatedly that they would love to, but that they are prohibited from doing so by state law.
Did the state law change since before Heights was rebuilt because people were swimming in the pool then?
So there were a couple.
And when I was on the accountability committee for the rebuild of Heights and middle schools, that was always the vision.
It was a promise, right?
Yeah,
the school district made a promise.
More than a vision, a promise.
Yeah,
right.
And I'll tell you, the city, and I wasn't certainly in the administration during that period of time. I do have a bit of a personal connection to that discussion from the school district side of things because of who my mother-in-law is. She was the superintendent at the time. But, in that discussion about how that pool would be used when the school district was asking for the community's support for the funding of that, the city was not involved in making that promise. I don't believe we were consulted in that promise, but there were a couple iterations of public use of school facilities specific to the pool, I believe. And what I've been told, there was a period of time where the school district made it directly accessible to the people, because they can, without involvement from the city. And then that stopped at a certain point. And then, I think back in 2013, after about 10 years, maybe, I believe, of Ed Kelly, former council president back under the old form of government, former mayor of Cleveland Heights, after 10 years of Ed Kelly begging the school district to make it available to Cleveland Heights residents, I believe in 2013, they finally said, yes, but only if the city is willing to take on the responsibility for collecting memberships and staffing this pool, because we want no parts of that. So if you've been asking us for 10 years, fine, but you got to do all the work, right? And Ed Kelly, after asking for a decade, said, sure, fine, we'll do it. And thus started the modern understanding of how the school's facility can be made accessible to the people. And that went on for a while until the school decided to rebuild, and went through that whole process. The rebuild occurred, and
part of the rebuild was to have a door where people could come in but have no access to the rest of the school. Because in the old days, security wasn't that big of a concern, and today very much is.
Absolutely.
And it was 10 years ago when we were doing the 10, 12 years ago when we were working on the design.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. So the history of this matters only so much. Ultimately, people will make decisions about whether or not to do a thing. But ultimately, the rebuild happened. There was, I believe, a short, period where they resumed that, previous arrangement. And then COVID hit. And the pool was done. It was closed for quite a while. And during COVID, as I said, I became mayor as that was going on. In 2022, in January, when I took office, I was operating from a budget crafted by the previous administration, voted on by me as a member of council. And because of the lack of access to anyone of the high school pool, there was no budget for additional lifeguards. We weren't even really exactly sure if we were going to be able to get lifeguards for Cumberland. But we did not bake into the budget any additional lifeguards for staffing the.
If that's the case, that probably needs to be
Well, there's more.
reviewed.
There's more. So the reason, in 2022, school district came and was talking to Parks and Recreation about resuming that program, and the Parks and Recreation director at the time said, we don't have budget for that. Now, what that created, that fact that we had not budgeted for that use, created a bit of space. We're in a new form of government. We are encountering massive problems, needs for investment, direct city services. And the moment when he said that, it created a bit of space to re-examine some things. We never actually had an agreement. I don't believe that there was ever a written agreement with the school district about us using the pool or managing their pool program. And, it was just sort of one of those seemingly ubiquitous handshake agreements that Cleveland Heights, at least in my view, is famous for at this point. But in that moment, it gave us some space to say, wait a minute, maybe we should take a look at this and actually figure out what we're doing. And so I asked a simple question. I said, why does the city need to be involved? It's not our facility. The response that I got was that state law prohibits the school district from spending any money on a program like this, a community access program.
Okay.
And being the inquisitive policy wonk that I am, I said, okay, can you share with me your citation? Like, where are you getting this from? Because I can take your word for it, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I did, frankly. So please just point me in the direction of the citation. Where in ORC does it say that, or OAC, or anywhere? And I did not receive an answer from either the administration or the district or the board. And
So
I kept asking
what they were saying was state law prohibits the school district
from doing that.
from doing it.
Yeah. Which is why they said that they required the city to fund it.
Okay.
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is obviously a big,
It's something
it's a
that
big
needs
deal
to
for
be
a
looked
group
at.
of people. And so I do want to address it. And I don't want people to think that there's just this, other weird motivation, like I hate indoor swimming or something like that, because that's ridiculous. But in this case, I asked the school district for more information. They did not provide it. They told me that they had a legal opinion indicating that they were directly saying that they were prohibited by state law from funding a community access program. I asked them to waive privilege on that legal opinion. They did not. I asked them if they would summarize the resources, summarize that they relied on in making. So you don't have to give me the opinion. Maybe it says things that are inflammatory, you don't want public. I don't want to judge that. But can you give me the resources that your attorneys relied on in making the opinion so we can take a look at what you're referring to? And they did not. And then I started looking into it myself a little bit and realized, wait a minute, Beechwood City Schools has a community access program that they fully fund, with no involvement from the city of Beechwood at all. Some of our residents here in Cleveland Heights are members of the Beechwood City Schools Community Access Program. They go swim at Beechwood High School pool, where I took, swimming class, because I graduated from Beechwood. And, if Beechwood City Schools can do it legally, and they've been doing it for years, surviving audit after audit about the use of their funds, then clearly there is a model to follow where Cleveland Heights University Heights School District can have their own program, completely manage their own facility. They can hire kids that go to the high school to, it could be a work-study program kind of thing, to lifeguard at the place. They're right there at school. The kids. You got the kids right there. You can hire your students. It can be both a swimming, community access program and also an employment program for the kids there. And so I started looking into it a little bit more. Ultimately, I did end up asking the law department to look into it, and they provided me with the legal opinion that I've actually published publicly recently. So anybody can take a look. There are some other issues at work here, too. The state of Ohio actually makes it easier for school districts to make their facilities available to the community. They hold them harmless from liability for any damages that occur from the use of a community access program. They don't even have to get additional insurance. We would have to. But, so that's part of it. Additionally, there's some licensing issues. The school district is the license holder for the pool, which you have to get. And there is a set of responsibilities that are specific to the licensee for staffing and maintaining their private pool, or public pool rather. So ultimately, as quickly as they can have their next meeting, the school board could create a community access program. The school district is probably wealthier in a certain respect than the city is.
They have a larger budget.
Larger budget.
They have more facilities, and they have,
And we've got a great deal of deferred issues that we're addressing, both in terms of staffing, facilities, equipment, that the school district probably has to deal with too, to a certain degree, but not to the level that I've seen here.
Mm-hmm.
And so from my perspective, if the city does not have to be a middleman, an intermediary between the people that were made the promise and the entity that made the promise, then we shouldn't be at this point. If the school district can create a community access program, which they can, they are perfectly empowered to take memberships if they want to, or they could just make it free to use. Set the hours, hire some kids or some adults to lifeguard, and make it accessible. They could do that directly. And if they can do it directly, I don't believe that they should ask the city that is already dealing with a great number of other issues to play the intermediary role on that.
All right. So you said you have a legal opinion on that you've made public.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, at some point, if you could send it to me, that'd be great.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mayor, and Mr. Gelfand, it's been 2 hours. Do you want to wrap?
Well, honestly, we could get into so much detail about so many things.
I know.
And I know that there's a lot of stuff that is on the mind, in the zeitgeist right now, like in the public discourse,
Right.
that is not necessarily some of the nuts and bolts stuff that a next mayor might need to engage with.
Mm-hmm.
I would be happy to do this again. I know 2 hours is a long time to be talking about stuff, but
yeah,
we could go on for 8.
Well, we've gotten through Public Works and Parks and
A little bit of
Recreation.
Parks and Rec. But there's more.
Yeah.
There's definitely more in both of those organizations to discuss.
Yeah, we don't necessarily need to get into as much. I think we went into a lot of detail about both things.
Yeah.
And,
Well, there are specific issues that I think are on the minds of some vocal residents.
a lot of the stuff we talked about are things that I've had many conversations with people about as I've gone door to door, and I've gone to block clubs and block parties and the things that candidates do. So yeah, this has been helpful.
And I'll tell you, I do not deny anybody their right to have a different policy position than me. Like, for instance, with the indoor swimming, I think that it makes more sense if we're talking about having a community access pool that is for the community. I think that we probably should build our own. I think, you know,
And
building
that's
one.
that's how we got into the discussion about the pool in the first place. But my thought, and a lot of people are thinking, well, I don't know what everybody's thinking, but I know that my thought is that if there's a way that we can use something that's already built, that the people of Cleveland Heights, and for that matter, University Heights, could have access to, because it's, and a little section of South Euclid that I know very well.
Mhm.
That would make sense to me.
One might want to take a look at how that was used under the old program.
Yeah.
And how many people took advantage of it and who those people were. Because making something accessible to the community on paper doesn't necessarily make it accessible to a particular person in reality. So for instance, a lap swimmer who wants to wake up at 6 and go swim laps for an hour.
That
at
might
the
not
pool,
work for them because the kids are using it at that hour, perhaps. I don't know.
Could be.
Potentially.
Truncated hours when it comes to the times of year that it's available. Certainly the hours of the day that the pool would be accessible. That additional entry might increase that a bit. But in terms of sort of ongoing accessibility, there could be concerns there.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I think, if somebody comes in and, I've been told, hey, maybe the city doesn't need to be involved. Maybe the school district can do it on their own, but just do it anyway. And that's a position to take.
Mhm.
It's not the position I've taken. It's not what I think is in the best long-term interests of the city as an organization either. Or the school district. I think that they should take it on.
Whoever ends up being the mayor might have a different
opinion.
might
Yeah.
do it differently. Yeah.
And that's fine. And that's what, the city will move but maybe we do this another time. I think that even if it's just us or if there's another, set of candidates that want to join the next one, even having this, publicly accessible is probably a useful thing for people to get a better understanding of some of the issues we're facing. Maybe next we'll go and just do sort of a rundown. Next time we'll do a rundown of even the structure of some of these departments, because I think that can be useful because we've made some changes over the course of the last 4 years. Very notably in planning, what is our department is now called Planning, Neighborhoods, and Development. And that includes quite a few functions that were previously separated. Under the old form of government, economic development was not connected to planning and development somehow. Separate functions, not very much communication, or at least certainly not as much as you would anticipate. So planning is a division of that department, economic development, community development, and then you've got building and permitting, which I was able to bring back in-house from outsourcing it to Safe Build.
Now, is that all in-house right now, or is it in a transition from Safe Build to in-house?
So we have fully transitioned away from our initial contract with Safe Build to do our building and permitting work. That doesn't mean that we've created a different agreement for services as needed, and there are certain functions that we still do need to outsource that we haven't completely, brought back in-house because we just haven't been able to get there yet. But
With Safe Build.
Safe Build for some of the stuff, yeah. Like if there's a particular specialized, inspector that needs to be used in order to address a particular thing, and we're lacking capacity in that particular thing, we can.
And do we now have an in-house housing manager or housing director?
So, this is the change that I've made. So, out of those divisions, there's building and permitting, which is our, building department, as we colloquially understand it. Then we've got code compliance. We've got a code compliance division as well, which people have affectionately called the housing department. Now, those are two separate divisions because one deals with the building permits and the inspections and compliance that comes with those building permits. The code compliance division deals with our housing code. So the
The
tall grass
citations
and
and
the
the-
gutter falling off, yeah, those citations. So we've got a code compliance division that deals with our housing code, our internal local housing code. Then we've got our building and permitting division that deals with what we use for our building code, which is state building code. We've got some, additions in our code, but primarily we rely on the state building code. And all of these have been consolidated into an integrated development department, to make sure that planning has a better chance of communicating with development, which has a better chance of communicating with code compliance, because all of those things are important to redeveloping Cleveland Heights.
So having brought it back, do we have two different directors or managers now?
So we've got assistant directors for each of those divisions. So in code compliance, we've got Assistant Director Butler, who deals with the housing code. And then in building and permitting, we've got a CBO, a Chief Building Official, and that's Eric Elmy. Relatively new.
Eric who?
Elmy. We brought him on from the city of Cleveland, doing work there. That was an experiment in a certain respect. We
Yeah.
didn't know if we would be able to attract a CBO.
And they're assistant directors to which director?
Eric Zamft is the Director of Planning, Neighborhoods, and Development.
Okay.
The overarching development that includes planning, economic development, community development, building and permitting, and code compliance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank
There's
you.
a lot more.
Yeah, I know.
promise.
We're, I think we've just scratched the surface. This is the kind of thing that I'm hoping to get way more into during the transition if and when
Yeah.
I'm the person who does that.
Well, I'll tell you, this is one of those things where I hope that I can be of service in that process as well. There's a lot to go through, a lot to get up to speed on, both in terms of the general state and structure of the government, and also some of the changes and the upcoming changes in the government as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you.
looking forward to a continuing conversation. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Great to see you.
Good to see you too.